Hello. This lecture presents a few different challenges to morality. That is to say, it considers the question, why be moral? And maybe there's no good reason for actually being moral or ethical. These challenges come from Plato's Republic, and so what I first need to do is explain some background about that text. Like many of Plato's other works, the Republic features a dialogue between Socrates and a few interlocutors. But the Republic is really expressing Plato's own views, and this is indicated by the fact that Socrates will talk at length without much by way of genuine discussion, and interlocutors will just say, "You're right, Socrates," or "Yes, Socrates." So we're really getting Plato's own view in the Republic. And what Plato wants to figure out is what justice is. So that's the main question. What is justice? And what does it mean to be just as an individual? And what does it mean for society to be just? So the first few books of the Republic attempt to define what justice is for both an individual and a political system. Now that question about what justice is meant in part to respond to the question, does justice pay? That is to say, why be moral? Is there any good reason to be moral? In answering these two questions, what is justice and does justice pay? Plato presents an account of human nature as well, and so considers what human beings are motivated to do and what they ought to be motivated to do given their sort of psychological constitution. Let us now turn to the challenges that Plato raises against justice or against morality. Ultimately, he's going to reject these challenges, but it gives him a task to do in the Republic. The challenges are presented by Glaucon, who is, in fact, one of Plato's brothers. And Glaucon presents these challenges not because he really deep down believes that justice doesn't pay or is not worthwhile, but rather he wants to understand why justice is worthwhile, why the just life is the best kind of life. And so he raises three different challenges to justice. One concerning the status of what justice is and its origin, whether it's something merely subjective or conventional, or whether it's something objective and natural. The second challenge is the so-called Ring of Gyges thought experiment. And this challenge considers what people really desire and is meant to show that people really desire to look out for themselves and not care about morality or justice. And finally, the third challenge will be to compare the just life with the unjust life and consider which one's better. And so what I'm going to do now is go through these challenges and present them in a little bit more detail. Now, Glaucon's first challenge runs roughly as follows. First, he makes the point that people naturally pursue their own self-interest at others' expense if they can get away with it. So if you're not going to be caught, you're not going to be punished, you're going to pursue your own interest and not the interest of others and not be altruistic. This first point will actually be supported by the second challenge, but let's hold off on that. Glaucon follows this first point up with thinking about what would occur before civilization existed, what occurred before we had societies, governments, and so on. And he thinks that in this sort of state of nature, rather than a state of society, most people can't get away with it, and they suffer from others' pursuit of their own self-interest. So people are fighting with each other, and you're going to be caught by others that might have more power over you, might be stronger, might be greater in number, and what have you. And so the fact that you can't always get what you want leads to a social compromise. So you get together with others, you realize that each of you can't really pursue your own full self-interest, and so what you'll do is settle upon laws for what's just and unjust, settle upon laws for what is permissible to do and what is forbidden to do, and punish those things that are forbidden. And so this is what he thinks is the origin of justice, of the notion of justice. It arises from the transition from the state of nature to a civil society, and it's just this social compromise. And so what that means is that it's a mere convention and merely a human invention rather than something objective, something natural. And notice further that it's valued, justice is valued, only as a second best option. The first best option would be to get your own self-interest, but you can't always get away with that, so you're going to settle for this second best to have some basic security from others pursuing their self-interest. So that's the first challenge. Now, as I indicated, the first part of this first challenge, the idea that people naturally pursue their own self-interest if they can get away with it, is supported by the next challenge, which we'll turn to now. The second challenge is formulated through a thought experiment and actually sort of a myth. So the myth is that this farmer discovers this ring that was owned by this guy, Gyges. And so he discovers the ring, and then he realizes after he puts it on and kind of messes with it, if he turns the ring around on his finger a certain way, such that, the gem or what have you is facing inward rather than outward, that he becomes invisible. And so the thought experiment is, what would people do if they had this ring? Not just this particular guy, but what would people in general do if they had this ring? So why is this thought experiment an interesting one, a relevant one? Well, the thought is that by isolating people's motives from all social compulsion, reveals their true motives. It reveals what they would do if they could get away with things. So by becoming invisible, you are protected from social compulsion because no one else can detect that it's you performing certain actions. And so the thought is if you have this ring and you make yourself invisible, you'll do what you deep down desire to do. And so that's the idea here, is that the tale of Gyges' ring isolates people's true motives, and Glaucon makes the further point, well, if you have this ring, or the average person has this ring, they'll do what they deep down desire, which is to act selfishly, to get what they want, to steal from other people, to even rape other people, and just do things that are horrible to other people because it's in their own self-interest. And so they're going to do unjust actions, primarily. And so if Glaucon is right about these 2 points, that we can isolate people's true motives by considering how they would act without being able to be detected, and if Glaucon is right that people are going to act selfishly and unjustly, then we get the point that everyone's true motives are selfish or unjust, and they act justly only unwillingly. That is to say, they'll do moral things, but only because they can't get away with it. Now, Glaucon's third and final challenge is really the crucial one. So the previous challenge raised the question of what people's true motives are, in fact, whereas this third challenge focuses on what people ought to do, what people should do, regardless of what their motives in fact are. And so Glaucon presents this challenge by a comparison of 2 different kinds of life. One life is the maximally just life, but it's a maximally just life that doesn't get any rewards from being just. So the person has a reputation among others of being unjust. So they don't get any of the extrinsic rewards from being recognized as being just. You compare that person with the person that is maximally unjust, but who has a reputation for being a good person, who has a reputation for being just. And so they'll get, praised for how great of a character they are. And so once we compare those 2 lives, the question is, which life to prefer? Because the maximally just life, if that person has a bad reputation, a really bad reputation, well, all sorts of horrible things are going to happen to them. They're going to be punished for crimes. They're going to be put on the rack. They're going to be tortured, all these sorts of things. And so Glaucon says here, it's obvious that you should choose the second life. It's obvious that what one should do is be unjust and get a reputation of justice, if that's the two options, that's the one you ought to pick. And so what that means is that justice doesn't really pay. What really pays is the reputation you have with other people. It's not justice itself that matters. But of course, in the Republic, Plato's aim is to reject this idea, to reject this challenge and respond to all three challenges and show that they're mistaken and rest on mistaken assumptions. Now, to conclude and give an overview of what we've seen, the challenge is that justice is merely conventional, and it's valuable only because it gives you social consequences. And so the unjust life is better. There's no objective truth to being what's right and wrong. And the just life only gets you good things because people praise it and reward it. It's not better on its own. What Plato does in the rest of the Republic is argue that justice is objective, that it's intrinsically good, and also has intrinsically good consequences. So what he'll do is compare it to health. Health, to have a healthy life and a healthy body, a healthy soul, that's going to be intrinsically worthwhile and bring about good things. You can do more if you're healthy and so on. And so that's what justice is for Plato. It's a healthy soul, to have a psychologically healthy soul. And he'll explain that further in depth in the Republic. And if he's right about that, then he thinks that it's obvious then that the just life pays, that the just life is better than the unjust life.